What's going on, everybody? Good morning, good evening, or wherever you are, and whatever time it is. Welcome back to yet another video with you, man, Immersiaholic. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 2 of our head-to-head campaign, where we're playing as the Lusitani using the divided Impera Oval mod for Total War Rome 2. Today, we continue becoming the masters of Iberia. We defeated a couple Iberian tribes in the last episode. Now we're bordering the major colonial power of Carthage to the southeast here, and then we have more disgruntled neighbors to the north that we'll have to deal with. So over the next few months, we're going to be exploring our options. Do we go north and take on the Iberians first, or do we take on the Carthaginians? It depends on what Carthage is doing, really. And so we're going to be using our scouts to basically check out the cities of the Carthaginians and see what kind of military mobilization they have going on down there. And for the most part, they don't really have anything. There's a general here and there recruiting a couple units, but then they disappear return after that. So as far as we can tell, the Carthaginians are not planning any major operations in our area for the time being, and instead of focusing on wars somewhere in Africa or the east, as far as we can tell, at least. Meanwhile, our army is still recuperating at Kartuba just a few turns after we're taking it, so it'll need a couple more turns until it's back up to full strength. Like I said here, the Carthaginian generals that we'll start seeing popping up randomly from time to time, and we'll keep a scout permanently down in the southwest to look for that. But to the north, the Carpatani are a very enticing target. If we take them, it will solidify our hold over the center of Iberia, take over the central Iberian plateau, or at least a good chunk of it. Once we hold that town, it's a very strategic position because it's surrounded by rivers, and then we'll be able to hold our position there and defend it from any encroachment from the north or the northeast. We move our army up into position. However, just before we begin our attack, the Gallici declare war on us. The Gallici are a tribe to the far northwest of Iberia, basically some Celt-Iberians. They're fairly neutral in most relations, but they're apparently fairly aggressive and treacherous and want to come and declare war on us. That is unacceptable, and we'll have to take them out. But our army is already in a perfect position to take on the Carpatani, and it's the dead of winter, so the Gallici won't be able to get to our capital for at least another 3 to 4 turns, roughly. So because of that, I'm going to do a really big gamble here and go ahead and attack the Carpatani. The Carpatani should be a one-hitter quitter, so it should be pretty easy to attack them. But the way we're going to do it is the way we did in our last video with previous factions. We're going to declare war now that we have our large army very close by to their own, in a position to ambush them. So we send off the declaration of war, and then we wait for the ambush to happen, and it happens perfectly. Our king launches the ambush on the Carpatani, and now let's jump into the battle and hopefully wipe out their army and get ourselves a nice quick victory for this war. And here is the battle map. You can see we have the entire enemy army surrounded basically on all sides. We'll be smashing them from the north and from the south, although our southern side is a little bit more of a defensive line. We'll be expecting to form 2 lines around them and then just basically squeeze them until they get exterminated. And of course, to the east, we do have a small cavalry contingent to try and chase down their skirmishers. Skirmishers are always trying to run away in these types of ambush battles, so need to make sure we nail them. Just like here, we're nailing the enemy chieftain. This is their king, their chief, their top dog, and so our skirmishers are definitely focusing fire on him. The javelins get devastating hits on the cavalry. They're just so large, and even though they're kind of armored, it doesn't matter because they're so big that the horses take a lot of the damage and kill their riders as they fall over. Meanwhile, deep in the forest here, our charge is going off perfectly, although the enemy does get a good charge against us as well. But they're very clumped up, very surrounded. And because they're so clumped up, though, we're actually able to wrap around them as well and kind of swing around in a bit of a U-shaped formation. Here you're seeing my infantry charge up into the rear of some of their own enemy infantry. And then they have cavalry coming in. And down here, we have the enemy chief himself trying to escape the battle, try and fall back to his capital, and it is absolutely not happening. Our slingers and javelin men cut them down. All the while our cavalry is in pursuit as well, and we make sure he does not leave the battlefield alive. And with the enemy chief getting taken down, the rest of the army is in absolute tatters. There are a few units holding out though, so we do some hammer and anvil tactics with our light cavalry. Even though it's just light cav, it's still good enough to deal massive morale penalties to the enemy light infantry. And so we get the majority of their army wavering, but zooming out here you can see there is a massive clump in the center of the forest that is basically on the brink of routing. They've been wavering for a while, and they did last a little bit longer than what I would have liked. If we had some archers, that would have helped us out massively, but the Lusitani don't get any archers whatsoever. So instead, we're just going to have to grind them down for a little while. You can see them trying to break out of the formation here. That's their men walking away at the top of the screen. They're trying to escape and get out of the encirclement. Some of them will, but then with our cavalry charge coming in there at the top of the screen, that is it for the Carpetani. We wipe out their army. They go into a full absolute retreat, and then our cavalry run them down to a man. And here are the stats if you wish to see them. Unfortunately, one of our cavalry units got smashed by the enemy, but the rest of our units did fantastic, all getting lots of kills, and it basically went off without a hitch. So it's nice to have another ambush in this campaign go off perfectly. We're definitely going to have to try and focus on using those tactics in the future. Now though, we need to take the Carpetani settlement. It's a pretty chill settlement. It doesn't have a large garrison, so we should be okay with it. We might even end up auto-resolving it. There is their army gone, completely wiped out. Perfect timing. And we'll end up ransoming all the captives to try and get as much money as we can. I generally try to do that unless I'm really trying to make sure that the enemy of these people that I'm fighting, I'm trying to be friends with them, because that's when you want to ransom captives and let them go. That's when you want to kill them. But anyway, we're going to auto-resolve the fight and taking the city of Aplasia, the capital of the Carpetani. Now we have a very strong foothold in the center of Iberia. We will take some casualties with this auto-resolve. It's a little bit rough, but manpower is not an issue for us at all right now. Although most of the casualties went to our cavalry and our higher tier axemen, so that was a little annoying. The auto-resolve in Rome 2 is always rough, always screws you over one way or another. But we'll then occupy the settlement and solidify our position in the area, so that's perfect, and the Carpetani have no more territory, so they're wiped out. That's a war gone in literally one turn. After a couple turns of recuperating, spring has now arrived, so our army is trying to march west as quickly as possible to defend our capital from the Gallici, who are sending a large army down to the north. You can see it at the top of the screen. It's very concerning that they're so close to our capital, but thankfully our main army is arriving in time, and we'll even have some extra mercenary units joining the cause, so hopefully our army should be more than enough to deal with these guys, but we'll have to see what kind of position we get into. Unfortunately, we couldn't ambush them at all, really. Didn't want to risk them being able to get around us or just retreating, so instead we're having one of our first major completely frontal assault battles. That's right, there's no trickery here, there's no reinforcements. This is a complete 1 versus 1, the Lusitani versus the Gallici. Let's do it, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are on the battlefield. We have a very massive hill right here in the center of our deployment zone, so we're going to deploy on that. We have our light infantry on the flanks and then cavalry on the far flanks. Here in the center, we're going to basically form a defensive position on the edge of the forest. Hopefully the enemy formation, we can see their scouts at the top, will come down this valley and we'll be fighting in the center here in this big blue circle. So we'll be surrounding them with forest and tree line. We have cavalry on the far left and the far right. Hopefully they can get around and try to do some recharges as quickly as possible, because that is our main advantage over the other Iberians at the moment, is using a lot of cavalry. Although we do have some good infantry that should be arriving to our armies in the next couple of videos, hopefully. We start our formation off with our Balearic Slingers in the front. That's right, we have the best of the best when it comes to Slingers, though. They are mercenaries, they're not part of our roster, but that's okay. They are well worth the money. Then behind them we have some AOR Iberian Swordsmen. These guys are fairly solid, about 20 armor, large shields, good swords. Not very good armor piercing damage, but they have 300 men per unit, so they form a very large, very solid main battle line for us, considering that we're a barbarian faction. But then we move our army entirely forward to try and draw the enemy down so they can see where we are. The far right and left flanks, we even have our light infantry forming up close to our main battle line. We're actually not even separating them that much. Here are our light infantry, that's what they're called, the Lusitani light infantry. Fairly light, fairly quick, but again, they have 300 men per unit, so these guys should be able to help us out quite a lot. And in the distance, we can see the enemy army starting to come down the hill now with their forward elements. Here's some nice close-ups of our cavalry getting into position on the far left and right flanks. Because of the hills, the enemy could not see our cavalry just yet, despite them being in the open. So hopefully we can set them up into a good position to outflank the enemy army when they charge down. And speaking of which, here they come right now, charging down this massive mountain that we're fighting on. They have the higher ground technically, at least for most of the battlefield, so we're hoping that they'll basically charge down into us and use that to feel more confident in charging into us, and then we can spring our left and right flanking traps. Unfortunately though, the other Iberians are just as skilled as us in hiding, and so as soon as they go into the forest, they disappear extremely fast. That's something we'll have to be very aware of going forward in this battle and in future battles. Seeing the enemy army coming down so quickly though, we've moved forward our swordsmen, so they're in front of our slingers are in the rear. They have massive range though, so they should be engaging momentarily since the enemy army is coming down the hill in massive numbers down. Speaking of which, and there the stones begin flying. Our slingers are now letting loose on the enemy. They're not going to get a lot of kills straight away, it'll take a while, but it is more than enough to make them very, very mad and make them want to charge down into our position. Speaking of slinger fire, we now have javelin fire coming in as well, and they are decimating this enemy champion unit coming forward. It was initially leading the charge of their entire army, but their champions here are just getting absolutely decimated. Oh my goodness, those javelins are savage. But they have massive numbers coming in behind the champions, so here we are with the charge across the entire front line. Swordman on swordsman, Iberian on Iberian. This is where the full battle begins. Thousands of men are going into melee right now, and it is absolutely chaotic. There's dust flying in the air, blood is flying everywhere, slings are being slung back and forth, and our javelins are also trying to annihilate the enemy cavalry, especially on the far eastern flank over here. Unfortunately, their cavalry turns around and charges into our light stuff, so we will take some casualties there, but in the end we should be able to win the cavalry fight because we're going to try and surround them, but it's very chaotic and very disorganized. Meanwhile, on the western flank, our shock cavalry are getting into the enemy skirmishers. That's right, they have some slingers in their army, not a lot, but enough to be cause for concern. Our cavalry is going to shut that down immediately though, although this is just a lancer shock cav unit, so we need to charge them in, get their kills and get the hell out, and that's what we're doing with that. We'll continue cycle charging them as time goes on. And here is a shot of the battlefield with the UI turned on. You can see we have a massive clump of enemy units in the center of our formation, and while we're holding it for the most part, we are going to need to start outflanking them as quickly as possible, because at the end of the day, numbers are going to win in a battle like this. So it's all up to our cavalry to outflank them and start hitting them from behind and getting some serious rear charges. And speaking of which, here we are on the far western flank now. Our light cavalry are getting involved, charging into the rear of enemy swordsmen, just as our Balearic slingers let off a devastating volley of shot. Oh my goodness. It's a little bit of friendly fire in there from our Balearics, but that's okay, it's worth it. These men are going to rout in the hundreds right now after getting recharged downhill from our own cavalry. And here we are seeing those routs go off. We have hundreds of men routing from the battlefield, hundreds of enemies combatants, by the way. Our our own men are holding very well for the most part. Our center is still being pressured, but now our cavalry is pushing in from both sides. We're coming in from the rear and from our own battle line that has a small little gap there, so we'll be trying to send in our general. In the meantime, our cavalry is trying to recharge, although there's just so many men routing, they have to get through a blob of routing troops before they can even begin the recharge. But as soon as they do, even though the charge itself is not very good, it deals massive morale penalties to the enemy, and they are on the brink of routing as an entire army, not just a few contingents. Here, the chaotic melee continues to ensue, although at the top of the screen you can see our cavalry are getting involved and getting some better recharges now, and so we're going to start seeing massive chunks of enemies continue to rout across the battlefield. And there we have it at the top of the screen. Hundreds of men just leave all at once. And then seeing so many men rout, the rest of the enemy army begins to rout. We annihilate their slingers, and the enemy army is finished. They have nothing left. And so now, it's up to our cavalry to run them down and stop them before they escape all the way back to northern Iberia. So here are the stats if you wish to see them. We did take some fairly strong casualties here. Unfortunately, one of our slingers got hit pretty hard. Our axemen actually took quite a lot of casualties considering that they're supposed to be fairly well armored. And then some mixed casualties among our lighter troops. So those axemen, I haven't really found them to be all that useful. Even though they got some decent kills, they really got hurt. And so I'm really hoping that I can replace them with the Lusitani bear warriors as we continue moving forward. But the rest of the enemy army almost got entirely annihilated, but some of their troops did manage to rout just because there's so many of them. So we'll have to chase them down here in a moment. Here's our epic slow motion fight of armies. Just one of the beautiful things about doing multiplayer. You have a lot of slowdown like that. Some random lag and stuff. And once again though, we will release the captives just so we can get more money. The more money we get, the better, because our economy as the Lusitani is really struggling. In the next video, in fact, we'll probably do a little bit of an economical overview once we take over a few more cities, just so I can show you guys what's going on. But anyway, that is it for the Galaici main army. They don't really have anything else. They have a general in their capital, we can see, but he's in the middle of recruiting an army, so they're not a threat right now. We auto resolve them away, and their primary army is wiped out entirely. We ransom the captives again and continue leveling up our army in general. This army is doing really well, but again, it did take some casualties, so we're going to have to wait a few months before we launch a counterattack against the Galaici. But at least now we have a cause for war against them, and now we can go on and take them out without receiving too many diplomatic penalties. And here, by the way, we're going down the blue skill tree because it upgrades our chances of dealing successful ambushes, and that's really going to be the crutch that our early game military is going to have to lean on. Here we finally get some diplomatic relations going too. The Lusitani send a representative to us. We get non-aggression pacts with them, and we get trade with them. This is really nice because we haven't really had any diplomatic relations with anyone yet. Everybody's been quite hostile or strictly neutral with us, and the only faction that wanted anything was Carthage. But one of our rules for the multiplayer game is that we cannot have any diplomatic relations with Carthage or Rome. So we will take whatever we could get with fellow Iberians, as long as they are not getting in our way of conquest. After a few months of our army recuperating, it is now ready to continue the counterattack against the Galaici. However, they now have a decent garrison in the city, plus an army that's in the middle of being recruited that adds a lot of extra numbers to the garrison. So what we're going to have to do is basically wait things out. We set up our army to ambush them just outside of the city, and we now begin the long wait for the Galaici to come back. But then, out of the fog, we have a man dressed in nothing but blue paint and a robe around his shoulders. Some Bluewalker that we've been hearing about comes out of the fog. He says he represents a people called Gallia, apparently a trade confederation of the north. We're not too sure about this. They do have a lot of resources available though. But I don't know, he sounds a lot like the stories of the Bluewalkers of the north that we've heard. We have to be very careful about this, but at the same time they're bringing in a lot of money, gifts, resources, an opportunity for us. So for now, we will accept trade with them, but who knows what kind of menace the Bluewalkers will turn out to be. We'll have to wait and see, ladies and gentlemen, but for now, we're going to end it there. So thank you all so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I shall see you in the next one.